Well, firstly, welcome to the making of my short animation, The Story of the Turnip. Now we are here in the table of contents and, well, the making of has now become very detailed, and therefore below in the description you can jump to the individual chapters which are linked there. There are 6 chapters, and if you're interested in something special, you can also jump to the sub-chapters, which are also linked in the description. Because the making of will take a bit more than an hour, and since I consider some issues in more detail, you can skip this if the sub-chapters take too much time. Fine, then, have fun! Right, here we see the first sketch which has arisen. Well, which came to my mind. The sketch is quite fundamental, and the turnip is dressed in something like a shirt and short pants. Now we are here in the first sub-chapter of the first chapter, in which the base of the turnip is created, actually the body, which I am modeling now in time-lapse. By itself, no complex modeling. I used the sketch as a reference and began the remodeling. Now a subdivision surface modifier is still in use, and a smooth shader is applied so that the surface appears smoother. Now here we will take an orange material over it. Fine, I think it's already a good result of the turnip. Well, this is the base of the turnip. Right, now we come to the limbs in the second part of the character design. The sketch serves here again for the reference. We are starting with the arms. Well, here is already now the first arm. Of course, this can now be mirrored to the other side and a bit adjusted. And so the arms will be finished. Now we come to the legs and feet. Well, here now the first leg is completed. I've prepared the original legs, and these need to be adapted and moved downward a little bit. So the limbs are made, and that is a satisfactory result. So now we come to the shoes which the turnip wears. Here's the first basic design. This first sketch looks a little bit wired, but the second design is much better. Here at the beginning we use a subdivision surface modifier so that the surface appears again smoother, so that we can remodel the sketch better. So, now a smooth shader about it, and well, finished is the first shoe. The shoe doesn't quite fit the character, so now I have prepared the original shoes, which are naturally modeled slightly finer. Here also a detailed view of this shoe. Of course I have only modeled one shoe and then copied and mirrored. Fine, the shoes are tuned. Well, now we are coming to mouth and teeth. First we delete some vertices and rearrange them around the mouth. Well, vertices means the points. This has to be also adjusted from the side view. Then we extrude twice inwards and close the mouth space. Now let's come to the teeth, which can be modeled in an easy way. Still a subdivision surface modifier. Right, the teeth are now arranged individually and copied again and again. Here the one or other gap. Then I am adjusting the mouth a bit so that the teeth fit in there well. Fine, so it looks a little bit northy. Okay, so now we have a good result and are ready with the mouth. Now we come to the hair, or rather to the leaves of the turnip. This here is again derived directly from the sketch. Well, firstly the hairs are modeled head-on, 3 strands, then again 2 strands, and now these strands are adapted again from the side view, and then these 5 strands are copied more often. Something is adapted and already it is done. Now I have prepared the original hair, yes, because they are better modeled. Well, and now only the nose and the eyes are missing. Well, now we come to the nose, which is again modeled out of the main mesh. Before, you have to adapt the mesh a little bit, and then the nose is extruded out. Okay, actually you can't name it really nose, because in principle it is only one prong, which is coming out of the face. Right, now we come to the eyes. The problem with the eyes was to create them like they are in the sketch. And first of all, it was difficult to implement them in Blender. Well, I have tried that, but the result was not so convincing, as you can see here. Then I have thought about how could I make it better, and well, that's why I played a bit with the eyes. And as you can see here in the sketch, I made a kind of comic eyes. Here where the eyes are located later, a part of the mesh would be extruded inwardly. Well, this time I create the eyes separately. The eyes are then positioned as individual objects before the mesh. And now a texture is still loading, and thus the eyes were finished. Here is the result. Well, at the end of the first chapter I put materials and textures to the character, and that with the Blender internal renderer. The eyes I just have textured them in the previous chapter. Here you can see the other materials. And fine, here we have the final result now. Well, the textures does not fit completely and it isn't entirely satisfying, but this will again processed and developed in chapter 2. So, the first chapter is completed now. Well, at the beginning of the second chapter we come now to the rigging. Right. First let's open here the human meta rig under armature, which is available as a Blender add-on. The armature, or even the rig, is so to speak like the skeleton of a human being. Actually, this armature is in principle used for a human character. But anyway, I will use this here because if you adjust the armature a bit, it is suitable for the character of the turnip. Well, so it would go on and on, but I've prepared here a rig that fits on the turnip. Now I put back briefly to octahedral, which is set by default. But now I use stick because thus you can better see the character. Well, and these individual sticks, actually the bones, are now allocated various vertices of the turnip mesh. Besides, we use the white paint mode. Red means 100% allocation and blue means 0% allocation. We are making a little test right now. I put the rig in the pose mode so that we can move the bones. That means in red at 100% the respective red painted vertices move to 100%. To the other hand, in the light blue area, which is almost at 0%, the vertices move just barely. And indeed, the blue area at 0%, nothing moves. Well, now I have painted the individual body parts. Red is usually located in the center of each body part and then runs on both sides over a gradient into blue, depending on how the body part later is used in the animation. Here now a quick pose as an example. So, now we come to the first animation I have done with the character. Well, now we look briefly at the animation. Quite okay for the first attempt, but well, the main problems are very static. Only the legs move, and also with the eyes I am not satisfied because they should also have to move. The shoes are difficult, they must be simpler. At the moment this is disruptive for a walk movement. So, that is why we now come to the character improvement and adjustment for the following animation. Now let's start with the eyes. First I have created a new sketch. And well, I delete the old eyes and then connect the two pieces of the turnip again and extrude each eye inwardly. Now we have round eyes, thereby we take a sphere as the basic object, smooth the surface and position the two spheres. The main mesh will then be adjusted around the eyes. I have now added a separate circuit which exactly fits around the eyes, and the main mesh will now be attached to the two circles. The reason for the eyes, by the way, is firstly that the previous eyes looked not so good, and secondly that they could not move. The new eyes will get later also bones, so that the turnip can look in different directions in the later animation. So overall the eyes are now ready, and now we adapted the eyes by the height. Well, we color the pupils still black. Fine, then we are done. Well, now we come to the shoes. I have considering a bit, and then I decided that I create normal boots. Well, I already had boots for the turnip, but they were too fancy. And well, with the new boots I wanted to create a more realistic rolling movement, so that the walk motion looks much better, which wouldn't have been possible with the old shoes. The sketch is used here as a reference. We begin with a circle. First I remodel the shoe very fundamentally. Well, the basic shape of the shoe is finished now. Here we go a little into detail. Well, everything will be a bit rounded and the sole will be refinished a little more closely. And now comes a subdivision surface modifier about it. Fine, on the whole the shoe is finished. I have now prepared the originals. Well, the original shoes are already textured and, well, a better result than the old shoes. Actually, like normal leather boots, maybe like the boots of the past in the boots. Well, here we have now the final rendering, and I think it's a good result. Right, now we come to the conversion and cycles. What we have seen already on the boots. Before I wasn't really satisfied because before all materials and textures were rendered with the Blender internal renderer, but with the conversion and cycles maybe the character design will be refreshed. Here already is the result. And it's looking now much better and also more friendly. Here you see the shoes which are UV unwrapped with the Maxim technology, similar to sewing of a sweater. You can determine the seams on the object surface by using the Maxim technology. Well, and UV mapping consists of a UV coordinate system, which is used to the texturing of polygonal objects, which means 3D models. And U and V are the texture coordinates, and this makes it possible that you can project the texture on the coordinates of your desired position on your 3D model. Here I positioned just the soil texture for the individual chunks of earth at the head of the turnip, and here now the hairs or the leaves. Well, now we come to the carrot texture. The turnip UV mesh must be adjusted so that the surface structure fits harmoniously. Well, here briefly the node trees of the individual materials. Here you can make additional settings for the texture. The node trees are held quite simply. And well, let's look at the final result. And it looks much better than with the internal renderer, but I also have to admit that the textures which were used here are once again better than the previous textures. And well, I still have added eyebrows which can also move later. And now we come to the second animation test. And well, the character itself looks much better, even with the new boots, but the moves are still very static and the turnip seems rather to float, which now has of course consequences for the further course of the character design. Well, And to solve the problems of the movements of the second animation test, I found a new approach. Because if you want to imitate a human movement, and well, I want that the turnip moves like a human being, the basic body shape have to look humanely, and the current course of the legs doesn't fit to that of a human being, and that's why I've decided that the turnip gets human legs, as you can see here in the sketch. And then I was worrying about the turnip clothes. First I've considered a reed skirt, which a turnip has made by itself perhaps. Well, I have also implemented the reed skirt in Blender. Now a short insertion can be seen in the sketch. I have decided that the turnip needs 4 fingers, because later the turnip should grab something and therefore 4 fingers are better. Here now in Blender again with the reed skirt. Well, actually a good result. And now rendered. It looks okay, but maybe a bit too silly. So finally I simply decided to make a pair of shorts. Here is the first sketch. And here the second sketch, more detailed. Well, here the whole character with the shorts. Well, I have modeled the pants again according to the sketch. Well, the pants looks now a bit wired because the upper body of the turnip stops circular, but this isn't noticeable because the pants ends up a little bit tighter. Well, now you can see the speed modeling of the whole pair of shorts. Well, now we are finished with the pair of shorts, but we can see the shorts doesn't fit to the turnip, and well, so I use here the original pants. I delete the old pants. And fine, fits much better. Exactly. Now we have the final result of the character design of the turnip, as you can see it in the animation later. Well, and with this result I was very satisfied with the 4 fingers, the eyes, the legs. The whole has finally become more human, and that is what later benefits the animation. Fine, now we come to the final rigging. Indeed a special topic in Blender, with whom I have spent a long time. Here now the basic rig. Arms and legs can move now much better. I have completely revised the rig, and the rig is very important because if there are large errors there, it will be much harder for the animation later. And so you should always have a clean rig as possible with the largest possible movement angles. Because, for example, if you want to animate something special, but this doesn't work with the rig, you have to work up the whole rig. And therefore, a clean rig often means less work. I have used inverse kinematics for the later walking movements. That means with bones connections, or also called constraints, you get more realistic and dynamic movements for a character. Well, now I create a very short pose. Well, it looks good. Now again, briefly to the inverse kinematics. There are different targets and sources, and thus you can connect various bones. I've learned this also in a tutorial because the IK is not so easy to understand at first, but it considerably simplifies the animation because you can imitate movements much better. So I open up a new file. Well, and finally we built again a short pose, because despite the IK, of course you have to press some lever. Oh, here we have exchanged the bones with custom shapes. These custom shapes you can create by yourself and apply them to the respective bones. Well, here all the custom shapes I've created. That's the hip or both hips together, which you can move. And here also the eyes, either both eyes or the single eye which moves. Well, using the custom shapes you just have a better overview. Okay, now we are creating the short pose. The turnip stands there. The hand on the thigh. setting the camera and bringing light into the scene. Well, and the pose is done. Here you see now the pans, which aren't rigged suitable, and that is a mistake that I could not fix, but the arrows in the pans might look like normal folds. In the following subchapter we come now to the walk cycle. Well, this means basically that you animate a walk cycle once, which you can replay as a sequence over and over again. So you can create a longer walk and don't have to animate everything by hand again and again. There are, so to speak, 9 steps. And actually 8 steps, because the 9th step is again the first step. There are 5 main steps, namely 3 steps of contact. And 2 of passing. Well, and then there are 4 intermediate steps. 2 times the down steps. And finally 2 times the up step. And these intermediate steps brings even more dynamic in the walking movement. And now I divide the walk cycle in 2 curves. So, the first curve goes along at the height of the head, up, down, and so on. And the second curve goes along the hip level. And blue represents the foreground, of course, and gray represents the background. And now we are beginning to implement this scheme in Blender. We are trying to recreate the first pose now. Well, adapt something from the front, because with outstretched arms the turnip looks a little wired. The next pose will build in speed modeling. Now I am doing the 5 main steps. I've set the timeline to 40 frames. And you have to take care that you set the first keyframe at 0. Well, with keyframes you can save a pose to a particular frame. Well, but make sure you have to set a starting point of the timeline to 1. Fine, it looks already like a normal walk cycle. Still missing the intermediate steps, which we create briefly. They occurs every 5 frames. It is necessary to move only the sketch in the background to the next pose, not the character itself, because the turnip remains always on the same spot. Later you can make the character following a path while the walk cycle is played repeatedly. Well, and that's already a good result. It is a little bit jerky, but that point we will fix later. Now we come to the walk cycle front, which is also important for the walk cycle. The position of the hip and also of the shoulders is outlined here in an extreme way. And the sketch is limited to the passing steps, which means the step where the leg is pulled upward. Because every time if the leg is pulled upward, the hip moves also, and the shoulder moves slightly in the opposite direction to keep the balance. Shown here a bit exaggerated. This wobble of the hip back and forth is very important because it affects more dynamic later in the animation. And the general rule at a walk cycle is that the more moving body parts, the more realistic is the walk cycle, because in real life the whole body is moving during walking. Also, this isn't always obviously noticeable. Now we implement this again in Blender. Before that we need to fix the jerking. So I copy the 0 frame and replace them with frame 40. So that the transition works smoothly. So now we go to the passing pose at frame 10 and 30 and change the hip a little. Of course we have to adjust the respective intermediate steps at frame 5, 15, 25 and 35. Well, then we would be ready and the result looks quite realistic. Finally, you have to make sure that you use 40 frames, so the walk cycle is well structured. However, the timeline has to start from frame 1, so that the frame 40 and frame 0 will not play twice, because they are identical. You can later scale the 40 frames to 30 frames at the dope sheet editor, because in general 30 frames correspond to a normal walk. So finally we come to the third test animation. Before I have started the original animation, I have just created two houses and the turnip walk up to the camera. Well, a realistic walk. The arms move not perfect yet, but that's a big enhancement to the second animation test. Well, and with the third animation test, the character design, the rigging and animating is now complete. So the topic is finished. And in the next chapter we come to the idea of animation, the storyboard and the environment. Well, now we come to the first idea of the animation. So the first thought was that the turnip walks straight towards the camera. Then he should turn around and go back. And while the turnip is going back, a human hand appears in the scene and grabs the turnip. But then the question arises, in what kind of environment the turnip should be located? Where does a carrot exist naturally? And I think in the carrot field. Short slide, why turnip and not carrot. I will go more in detail later in chapter 4. Well, and a carrot field was a nice idea at first, but then I thought lettuce field is perhaps even better. Maybe the turnip has lost his way in the lettuce field. And well, now we go a little more into detail to the idea. I have outlined a simple storyboard and will now say something about it. There are 12 sketches on which I will focus on now. In the first sketch, the camera rests in a lettuce field. Before the camera there are two lettuce rows, which ends up in a vanishing point. And after a short while the turnip comes out from behind the head of a lettuce, roughly in the middle of the right lettuce row. In the second sketch, after the turnip came out, he looks cautiously to the left and to the right. And then he jumps in a single bound to the ground between the rows of the lettuce. Now the turnip is going towards the camera until he reaches a branch in front of him. In the fifth and sixth sketch, he jumps without further ado over the branch which blocked the way. Now the turnip is right in the front of the camera and notices that he is hungry. He is thinking, and finally he comes to the end that he just has to go to a tasty lettuce leaf. Therefore he goes back now and rips out a piece of a lettuce leaf. Here again a detailed sketch of the crack. Now the turnip takes the lettuce leaf and goes away while eating. Meanwhile you can hear approaching footsteps, and suddenly a hand grabs the turnip, and after several sounds of eating, the turnip head falls on the ground. And so the story of the turnip is completed. So, now we come to the environment design. I started with a field furrow. Actually, that's a simple mesh. And then I positioned the lettuce heads on the left and on the right. And well, here you can see 4 pieces of lettuce heads. Well, we can just look closely at a lettuce head. I have created individual leaves, then copied and slightly changed them. Well, and now we change to the material panel. And then for a better view in edit mode. Okay, you can't see so much here in edit mode because there are just too many polygons. But however, in the material panel you can already see the individual leaves. Alright, at this point, greetings to the guy who photographed the textures for the salad leaves for me. Special thanks. Well, here also again the ground, which is textured now. And here, by the way, we see the special salad leaf, which will be damaged later. And here the fraction is now already visible, and in this way the leaf will break later. Fine, here you can see now that all heads of lettuce are positioned. But the problem was the scene still looks very bare, and that's why I thought about it, how I could bring more mood in the scene. And so I started to create different stones and branches. Here you can see a branch. And here a stone. And another stone. Here a kind of wood bark. So I mean bark pieces, and here smaller branches. And still a few individual chunks of earth. Well, and then I spontaneously distributed all pieces in the scene. First 2 stones are additionally inserted, and further back in the scene I added a branch under which a wood bark is clamped. And here I put in a pair of branches and added the chunks of earth here, which are rather inconspicuously. And in the foreground still a branch over a stone and a wood bark. Right, and now there is some more atmosphere in the scene. However, it is still a little bare, so I decided to grow some grass. For that I have created a particle system. Now we add this, and well, there's, I activate this now, and well, there's much more atmosphere in the scene. Maybe not quite realistic, because in a field maybe don't grow so much grass, but it's, yes, I think a good result. Now we can render the environment. And Okay, the light is now something strange because I forgot to bring light in the scene. So we have to adjust this. I add a plane with an emission shader and a sun lamp, and well, we can render again. Right, it would fit now, so that looks quite good. This isn't the perfect light setting, and of course the sky is missing, but now we are ready with the environment. Welcome to Chapter 5. We have here the individual sound recordings, for example the lettuce leaf crack, or the footsteps of the man coming from behind. I show now just a few. Here the jump sound of the turnip. Here the sound that was used when the man crushes the head of the lettuce before he grabs the turnip. And here also the sound which you can hear during the turnip is eating the salad leaf. I recorded all the sound by myself, and you always have to try around a bit so that the correct sound comes out. For example, first I have torn a piece of lettuce for the leaf crack, which didn't sound well, and then I tore a slightly thicker drawing paper, which sounds much better. Here we see now two emergence images of the sound when the man crushes the head of the lettuce. Okay, that's all about sound creation. And now we come to the last chapter, which describes briefly the final settings in Blender. So, these are now the final blend files which I've created for the final rendering. I have split the final animation into separate video segments. Here is the first section where the camera is in front of the foremost head of lettuce and slowly focuses. Then we come to the first file where the camera moves in the field furrow. Well, by the way, I have now respectively stored two files from any video section with all render settings. So one file for GPU means the graphic card, and a second file for the CPU means the processor. So I could always interrupt the rendering or could resume it quickly. Well, and in the second file, the turnip looks out from behind the head of a lettuce to get an overview. And then the third file, which is actually the main animation. So here the turnip jumps in the field furrow, then runs towards the camera, tears off the leaf, and finally grabbed out of the scene. Now we come to the render settings. I have rendered everything at 1920 to 1080, which means full HD at 25 frames per second. Well, I saved all images as separate PNG files. I have used 200 samples. The samples could have set even higher, but for this significantly longer computing time would be necessary. And here also the performance channel is important because I have rendered mostly with GPU. I have set the value to 256 by 256. Which makes the rendering slightly faster. Well, here the image files which are obtained after the rendering. Now I click through the image files from blurred to sharp. Here also again some pictures. Now you see here, while surfing through this, only a very small difference, because these are later played very quickly, as I said, with 25 frames per second. And here are the last pictures of the animation. And then I collect the pictures in the video sequence editor and get a video file. And then the animation was finished. And well, I think finally it was my making of. First, thanks for watching. I hope it was interesting, and well, goodbye.